Welcome everyone to the fifth webinar from the EAT-Erasmus project. This is the final one in our series of webinars, but we're very keen for people to get in touch if they want to develop any case studies, and we'll talk about that throughout the webinar. So today it's myself and Steve Rutherford presenting, but this is a collaboration between multiple institutions in the UK and Europe. So this slide just shows you some of our collaborators in Minho and also in Zaragoza and Eurogeo, which is a European Association of Geographers. And there's some links on here if you want to learn more about the project. So our project, if you haven't made it to any of the other webinars, is very focused on enhancing equity, agency and transparency in assessment practices in higher education. So this is a project that's been funded for 3 years and we're in the final straits now. So the project will come to an end in early September this year, but we're hoping that the resources, the website and various other resources we've made will be really useful to everyone going forward to enhance practice in assessment and feedback. So the main aim of our project is really looking at enhancing understanding of a research-informed self-regulatory approach to assessment and feedback. So it's built around Carol Evans' EAT systematic review of what really works in assessment and feedback. And we're trying to look at different cultural contexts, and that's why we have European partners in the project. And one of the key objectives is for us to try and produce some resources that are easily accessible to practitioners on the ground to actually put some of this educational research into practice in their own context. So as we go through the webinar, I'll post some of these links in the chat in a moment. But if you scan this QR code, we'd really like your input and ideas about any resources that you think don't exist at the moment that would be really useful to help you with your own practice, whether that's at an individual level, team level, or institutional level. And this QR code will appear on the next few slides as well if you haven't had time to scan it. And all of these presentations will be hosted on YouTube following the presentation today, so you'll be able to find them there as well. So I'll hand over to Steve, if that's okay.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Sheila. So the webinar today is focusing around evaluating the impact. And so developing interventions and then sort of looking at the impact of those interventions that there are on all of the stakeholders involved. It's not just the students, it's a whole range of other people as well. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the sorts of evaluatory approaches that are good to take when you're making some sort of change or some sort of intervention or some sort of novel approach that you're using with an assessment. Or the change can be big, it can be small, and we'll then talk about some ways in which you can do that, and you can use EAT to help you think about different types of interventions you might want to do, and then sort of evaluating them afterwards. So there's various levels that you can evaluate the impact of an assessment or an assessment program. So it can be an individual assessment, it can be an aspect of an assessment, or it can be a much larger construct. So you can do that at the institutional level. So there are various institutional projects at several institutions I know of that are looking at changing assessment and feedback practices across the institution as a whole. So the key thing then is to think, what is the actual effect of that? You know, does it actually make things better? Does it improve things? You can do it at the school or department or faculty level, depending on what structure you have. And that's looking at trying to gather groups of people together to start those conversations and change the way people think about assessment, the types of approaches they use, maybe standardizing things and making the so you're all doing sort of things that tend towards best practice. You can do it at the module or course level, where you're looking at 2 or 3 assessments within a single module or a single course, and how they fit together and how they integrate with each other. And of course, you can then do a change at the individual assessment level. So you can take an assessment, tweak it to make it better or more focused towards supporting student learning, or you can change it altogether. But there's also the idea of changing your own personal practice and your own personal assessment literacy and developing that, and also the assessment literacy and perceptions and practices of people within a group as a whole. So that group could be a team teaching on a course or on a degree or in a school or a department, or just a group of interested people. So there's different levels at which you can think of evaluating that impact, either in terms of the actual changes it has or in terms of perceptions it changes. And the sorts of things that you're trying to evaluate are really, really important to think of whenever you're managing some sort of an evaluation of an assessment or a change you made to the assessment. So firstly, has it changed the beliefs and attitudes and concepts that people have about learning and about the role of assessment in learning? So that really underpins absolutely everything else. If people have a very fixed mindset about the role of assessment in learning, then it's very difficult to then change and modify and develop that. So are you able to actually change people to having maybe a more flexible approach towards the role of assessment in learning? There's obviously the impacts that you can measure on output. So that could be student learning gain. Does it actually improve their marks? Does it improve the way in which they perform a particular skill? Does it help them gain a skill or gain an academic approach faster or better? Does it improve things like their criticality, their evaluatory skills, their creativity, those sorts of things? Obviously, does it make them more employable? Does it make them able to use their degrees in a better way? And does it develop skills that they will use out in the workplace and out in the real world once they leave university? You can look at thinking of the impact on the sort of mental processes and the way in which things work. So it could be the way in which student approaches a subject. Do they now have a more deep understanding of that subject, a more comprehensive understanding? Does it change their sort of learning behaviors or the learning strategies? Does it make them more efficient in the learning strategies they use? Does it change the way in which they think? Does it support the way in which they work in teams or work and collaborate with each other, either in an assessment or in other teaching activities? Does it make the overall workload for either students or staff or both better? Does it make things more streamlined? Are you getting better outputs for less logistical effort? And so you're putting the effort into the cognitive effort rather than the shuffling paper type of things. Does it actually promote efficiency, and especially does it promote well-being? Does it reduce stress? Does it help people in that way? And also, does it provide equity and access and equal opportunities for students to compete in the same way within that assessment space, regardless of their background or regardless of any other issues that might be affecting them? So there's a whole range of different things that you could look at the effect of an intervention actually having. It's not just has it improved the students' grades. There's a whole load of other things that it can affect as well. Sorry. So I've used this word impact quite a lot. And again, that's a really important thing to think about. What do we mean when we're talking about the concept of impact? There's a range of different ways in which you can sort of measure impact and look at the effect of impact. And that link at the bottom links you to actually a table where sort of like a checklist table that Carol developed that's actually really useful in thinking about some of these impact areas. And so you can sort of tick it off and say, yeah, I've reached that sort of impact and have that sort of impact. So the first thing is the reach. What is the extent to which your intervention has managed to do the thing that you wanted it to do? So has it reached the audience that you wanted to impact upon? That could be students, it could be students and staff, it could be staff, it could be people who support the learning. But whoever you were targeting that change on, has it actually had that impact on them? Has it affected them? Has it actually had a change in focus? Has it impacted the students' ability to achieve the learning outcomes, their behaviours, their beliefs, their overall satisfaction with their learning or their engagement with their learning? Has it actually impacted and changed the design of the assessment? Has it made that assessment a higher quality? And we'll come back to what we mean by quality in just a moment. And has it actually changed the staff, the lecturers, the teachers' behaviours and satisfaction? Has it changed minds and hearts as well as impacting student grades? And the last two are really, really important as well. So is it sustainable? Is it a change that can keep going year on year on year and without having to put a huge amount of effort into rethinking it or supporting it? Is it transferable? Is it something that you can actually take, once you've done it as a pilot study on one assessment, take that principle to other assessments so that you're sort of spreading best practice? And the very final thing, of course, is has it actually had a benefit on the learning gains that the students have? Are the students learning better? Are they in a better cognitive space as a result of that change? So impact is a really, really important thing to think of, not just in terms of the things you're measuring the impact on, but the sorts of impacts that you can have as well. And then I mentioned quality. So what do we mean by quality? We'll come back to how that relates to the EAT framework in a minute. But essentially, you're looking at a higher quality design of the assessment. So is it, for example, there's a whole list of things here that could measure sort of a quality. Does it have more, is it more student focused? Is it developed more on providing opportunities for students to test their understanding, to evaluate themselves, to learn and to progress and to develop their understandings as part of that? Does it have a good quality, generally has a more focus on meaningful assessment, authentic assessments that are actually relevant to the students, that have real world meanings rather than something that's just a very artificial thing they do just because they're at university? Good quality assessment would hopefully increase the level of partnership between students and staff. That's not necessarily working together to design the assessment. It could be working collaboratively to understand what the different criteria mean, or to modify the language, or to get the students to understand what it is the teacher or the lecturer or the tutor wants out of that assessment. Coherence and consistency are really, really important. So is it coherent? Does it make sense? Do the students understand what's being asked of them? And is it consistent in terms of the quality hallmarks that you're expecting the students? You know, can you be confident that if you were to run the same assessment a year later, get exactly the same submissions back, that you'd give them the same sort of marks, the same sort of outcomes? Does it have a clear progression from one thing to another to another? So it's part of a learning journey for the student. And is it a manageable thing? Is it something that isn't going to impact on their ability to actually study? What we often face in higher education as a big problem is assessment overload. So the students are just churning out assessment after assessment after assessment, and they don't have time to stop and think and consolidate that information. And are you embedding reasonable adjustments, and are you have a transparent approach? So do the student know what happens to that assessment once they've handed it in? Who's marking it? How is it being marked? What's the quality control of that marking? Is it being marked to a certain set of standards, set of criteria, and that sort of thing? So again, really sort of key hallmarks of what a quality assessment could look like. And then also you're thinking about the engagement that that assessment provides. So is it encouraging the students to take ownership of their own learning? So when you're thinking about, is it engaging the students more? Is it increasing the students' activity and increasing their interaction with the assessment? Key thing to think about is, what does a good level of student independence or student self-regulation look like within your particular discipline? Is it someone who's very creative? Is it someone who's a good problem solver? Is it someone who's good at designing experiments? Is it someone who's good at designing engineering or architectural solutions to problems? Is it someone who can create good music, or is it someone who's very safe and understands the depths of what it is that they're doing in their practice? So, think about what defines a student who's independent and effective at self-regulation is an important thing to think of. And how would you determine what a good outcome of that looks like? That's really important to have in the forefront of your head when you're thinking about developing a change in an assessment. And you can think about then also where you're going to get that sort of evidence of the impact from. Is it observing the students' behaviours? Is it looking at their marks? But then various things can impact their change in marks. Is it looking at the amount to which they engage with certain formative activities? Is it something that they then continue doing as a behaviour afterwards? Does it have a transformative effect on their learning approaches? So just throwing lots of those ideas out. Hopefully we can talk a bit more about those in the discussion, but those are key things to think about when you're thinking of evaluating the impact and evaluating the effectiveness of an intervention that you've made in a assessment environment. And there's a way of doing that maps quite nicely onto the EAT framework. So I'll hand over back to Sheila.
Thanks, Steve. So we're just going to talk very briefly. Well, I'm going to talk at you. Hopefully you can engage in the discussion at the end. So please do post any thoughts or questions you have in the chat as we go along, and we'll come back to those. So thinking about what a high quality assessment actually looks like, the EAT framework, which kind of underpins the project that we're doing, has lots of really helpful resources. So I just post the link to the EAT framework in the chat there for you. So the EAT framework is based on synthesis of lots of literature about what actually makes a high quality assessment or a high quality program of assessments. And we're using this framework as a basis for developing kind of smaller user guides for practitioners as part of our project. Can you go to the next slide, Steve? So the EAT framework, just to remind you if you already know, or for those of you who may not be as aware of this, is based around three main themes. So really looking at things that we can do to improve assessment literacy, and that may be assessment literacy of students or staff or both. What can we do to enhance feedback and increase agency of students to obtain feedback and act on feedback in appropriate ways? And what can we be doing to ensure that our assessments are designed to be, authentic and inclusive and really integrated across programs? Next slide, please, Steve. So this is the EAT framework in practice. It's a bit of a busy slide, but it's a really useful tool, which you can either use at a holistic level. So you can use this EAT wheel to look at assessments at a program level or individual assessments across all of the dimensions. So assessment literacy, for example, in purple here, is broken down into 4 subdomains. So to ensure that students are very clear about what they need to do in assessments, in their assessments, they really need to understand what good looks like. They ideally need to also know how all their assessments fit together in a program, so how they feed into another and develop skills and competencies and knowledge. And I won't go through all of them, but the idea is that you can use this as quite a useful model to think about either improving one domain. So you could look at assessment literacy and try to improve that at individual assessment level or programmatic level, or you could focus on feedback or design, or you can use the whole thing. And we've got some example case studies to give you some ideas about how this can work in practice. And next slide, please. So let's have a look at making impactful changes to assessment practices. So using this EAT framework and the wheel I was just speaking about, here are some examples of how you could use all of the EAT dimensions at once, so all of those 12 subdomains across assessment literacy, design and feedback. So you could use the EAT framework to look at different aspects of an assessment or a program of assessments. You can use it to compare staff and student perspectives. So the wheel has numbers from 1 to 5, and you can get students and staff to rank their assessments or programs of assessments. And if you get students and staff to do that on the same assessment or the same program, you can look at gaps in expectations or perceptions and explore that in more detail to affect positive change. You could also just focus on one theme. So these can be, the EAT framework's quite nice because it can be used to make quite small changes or big changes, depending where you want to intervene. So you could focus on one theme. So for example, you could use the 4 dimensions within a theme, for example, assessment literacy, to develop that particular component. Or you could just focus on one specific dimension. So one of those 12 dimensions, you could focus, for example, on staff and student engagement with one aspect. So, for example, do students know what a good essay looks like, or whatever assessment you're doing? So it can be used at very, very different levels. The next slide. Yeah. You can also take different approaches. So you could, for example, just choose to develop one idea with your team and implement one idea with your students. There's the possibility to do this at bigger levels. So, for example, looking at all of the subdimensions of EAT and seeing whether they're really aligned, so that you can have most success with your program. Or you could really go to town with it and look at ensuring that all of these dimensions or the framework is really embedded within policy and processes, and you all have shared understanding. So again, it's very adaptable to different levels. You can use it as an individual lecturer within your own module or unit, or you can actually use it to affect programmatic level or institutional level change. So here are some examples of how you could use the EAT framework at different levels. So at an institutional level, for example, if we start on the left, you could actually use it to conduct an institutional audit, and there's lots of tools available to do that. So we would encourage you to have a look at the EAT-Erasmus website, where we're creating various tools for people to use in practice. You could use it at an institutional level to identify a key theme of focus, or to enhance existing
I think we've lost Sheila for a moment. Or is that? Have we lost Sheila?
Yeah, she's frozen.
Yes, we have. Yeah.
Okay, I'll continue. So you can do it at the institutional level, really, really broad things, looking at sort of an institutional audit or underlying sort of core ideas and core principles. Or you can develop something at the school level of a similar sort of thing. So looking to identify which areas you need to focus on as a school, and getting student and staff perceptions on that. You can use it as a vehicle to encourage more student partnership in development and design and auditing of assessments. Or you could use it as something that's a standardization thing for a school. So a suggestion that was proffered to me was you could use those 12 dimensions as titles in a standard template for all assessment descriptors. So you have to answer a little bit in each of those different sections. Or it can just be used as a conversation starter to encourage students to actually voice their ideas and voice their experiences around assessment. I'll hand back to you, Sheila, to talk about program, if you're there.
Sorry, yes, I am. We've been having problems with our university Wi-Fi the last couple of days. I probably should have plugged myself into a wired connection. So if I disappear again, just carry on.
So we're at program level now.
Program level assessment. So you could use it at a program level. So for example, you could engage, look at student feedback and how you can use this in reviewing and designing your programs. And there's a few other examples there. At a module level, which might be very appropriate for lecturers who are unit directors or module leads, You could use it to emphasize key criteria, key marking criteria, for example, and supporting students to actually understand the marking criteria and the language, and do some peer marking and things like that. Or you can even use it at the level of an individual assessment. And we've done quite a lot of this in our various institutions. So, for example, you could really just focus on supporting students to understand a key aspect of assessment criteria. So often students don't really understand what critical evaluation means, for example, and increasing dialogue around that can be really useful. Or even just opening up dialogue between staff and students about, what does staff think about their assessment, and how do students perceive that. So again, the EAT wheel, for example, can be really helpful there for identifying gaps in expectations. So a staff member may think that, students are very clear about what a good graphical abstract looks like, and students actually don't have a clue how to do one. So it can be used at any level.
So this is just reinforcing the same sort of thing, really. So you can do very tiny little changes. Often what people raise as a concern is say, well, I can't use this to make any changes because I have to give all of the things to do with my module or my course and all of the assessments they have to submit that way in advance, and so I don't have the power to change that at a later date. Well, actually, you don't have to make massive changes. You can make very, very tiny changes. It could just be focusing on one tiny thing within the assessment and just tweaking it a little bit to enhance it. It could be just a different way of talking to students, just opening a dialogue with students to talk about a particular dimension or some of the entitlements or logistics that they have. You can use it to frame the way in which you present an assessment, or to involve student in revising and developing the guidance that you give out, to make it more accessible to students. So it doesn't have to be big, monumental, I will completely change the assessment types of changes. It can be just very, very small things, the introduction of a paragraph, or the changing in a wording, or the different way in which you involve students. The key thing is to involve students in that, so get them active partners within that process, either in terms of developing the assessment or talking about the assessment. Or you can actually make big changes, and those are usually things that are slightly more long-term. So you could use them to make something that's a standard for all of the modules or all of the courses within your school, or it could be something that's you use as a big auditing tool to say, right, what are the real problems? What do we need to focus our efforts on to make the biggest impact and improve the student experience? Again, engaging students as partners in that is a really, really powerful approach. There's various, in terms of developing assessments and thinking about the sorts of things you can do, there are various resources. We've got some of them up on our website, and then also there's some embedded within the EAT framework themselves. And we've talked about these in previous webinars, but just highlighting them. There's a whole load of sort of rhetorical questions you can ask yourself as someone who's designing the assessment or designing a module or a degree scheme. So these are to do with types of design. So have you got a shared understanding of what a good outcome looks like? So this is looking at that first assessment literacy aspect. So does everyone have that similar understanding of what a good, a high mark, a medium mark, and a low mark should look like? And you probably find that actually they don't. You've probably got 100 different opinions, as everyone's got a different idea of what a good outcome looks like. And then there's sorts of activities and things that you could maybe build into changing those environments and building into an intervention, either from the lecturer point of view or from the student point of view. So there's a whole list of these for every single one of those dimensions. And so you can pick and choose those and see, is there something there that would work in your particular context? Because these things are very context specific. It depends on what's right for your discipline. It depends on what's right for your students, the level of students you've got, the age of the students you've got, the experiences they have, and so on. And there's also the fact that there's a lecturer version and a student version of this wheel, and that's a really powerful tool, because getting the students to think about these different aspects, just getting them to go through that as an evaluation of a particular assessment is a powerful thing to do. Partly it gives you some information about that assessment, but also it raises the idea in students that they actually have responsibilities for a lot of these different things. So, for example, that AL4 one on the right-hand side in the purple, am I clear about the requirements of the discipline? That really presents to the students, have I actually considered that? Is that something I've thought about? What does it mean to be a doctor or an engineer or a historian or an economist or an accountant or a musician? And so this is really a powerful tool to get students to actually think about their role and their responsibilities in the learning process and in the assessment process as well. So we've got a few case studies already, but we're developing a few more. And so I'll hand over to Sheila to talk a bit about those.
Brilliant, thank you. Hopefully my Wi-Fi will hold out. So we just wanted to really showcase some of the case studies we've been supporting colleagues to conduct within their own institutions. And some of these are available as short videos on our YouTube channel. And I think you can get to that through our EAT-Erasmus website as well. So these are range from very small interventions where people have looked at an individual assessment and tried to work using the EAT framework to enhance that particular assessment, through to quite big changes within programs. So we've got a few examples on the next few slides. So the top two here in red are case studies that have been conducted at Minho University in Portugal, in the Department of Education, where they've looked at developing a collaborative virtual learning environment space for their students. And the reason they did this was to try and enhance the engagement of their students with feedback and drive assessment for learning. So they've used the components of the EAT framework and the various tools to actually do this. In communication sciences, they were very keen to reduce the amount of feedback on group assignments and to make that more impactful and effective. And although that was their original goal with this case study, it actually turned out from their investigations that they required, they really needed to enhance assessment literacy to actually achieve their aim. So sometimes these are work in progress, and they can actually uncover things that are maybe not working in certain areas. At Bristol University, we've got a fair few case studies that we're developing, mainly in the sciences, looking at, so one example is focused on one of those dimensions, specific dimensions within the EAT framework, AD2, which is about designing assessments that promote work that's meaningful to the students. So in ecology and conservation, we used to have, or the people that run this program used to have, an essay as the main form of assessment. And they've done quite a lot of work to change that into a podcast type assignment, which is seen by the students as more authentic, because they're developing their science communication skills. So often in ecology and conservation, you're communicating to lay audiences about the importance of various scientific issues. So here they're kind of working in randomly allocated pairs. They do some formative work and get some feedback on that. And then they do a summative podcast with a student that they choose. So that's working on one specific dimension of the EAT framework. We've done some other work looking at using all the dimensions of the EAT framework, so all 12 dimensions, to actually design a student-based survey, a student-developed survey. So the students create a survey based on those 12 dimensions to help develop a relatively new assessment that they're running within animal and plant physiology, where students make teaching resources based on their taught content in the form of narrative PowerPoints. So this can be used as an evaluation tool to see whether students are actually developing that we're having the impact we want on students. There's also been some work whereby the framework has been used, again, by students to develop some student-led collaborative sessions to try and improve assessment literacy. So this is very based around what does good like, what does a good output or assessment submission look like, and doing some peer marking and using exemplars to kind of enhance assessment literacy. In zoology, plant sciences, and biology, they've been using EAT to develop an assessment and feedback portfolio with students and a feedback cafe that actually supports students to engage with their feedback, reflect on it, and act on it appropriately. And this is now feeding into a new assessment that's going to be implemented at year 3, where students are essentially forced to reflect back on the skills and knowledge they've gained in year 1 and 2 and kind of plan their own way forward in year 3. And at the university level, we're using the EAT framework together with Tester, because we run Tester here as well, but really to support students and staff across all disciplines across the university to understand how their assessments fit together at a programmatic level. So really ensuring that staff and students have a holistic view of how assessments at year 1 feed into year 2 and year 3, how formative assessments feed into summative assessments, and really thinking about potentially using this to redesign their programs if necessarily to, as Steve was saying before, assessment overload is a major problem in a lot of institutions. And when you look at the a programmatic view of assessment, a lot of that assessment can be culled or redesigned to be more impactful. So Steve, back to you.
Yeah, here's a few others. I'll just skim through those very, very quickly. Something that actually Sheila and I both did when Sheila worked at Cardiff a few years ago was getting students and staff to evaluate all of the assessments on year 1 of the programme, and then to identify the areas that we needed to work on where the students felt it wasn't going up to scratch. A year 2 biosciences module use the framework to identify the need to train students to undertake group work effectively. And so that was a major impact that had there. Just the introduction of some training activities to support them in that group work activity. There's also chemistry used it to help guide placement students in what they needed to do for one of their assessments that they did. The next one's my particular favourite, is in the literature department. What they did was they broke down the marking criteria and spent 5 minutes at the beginning of each session talking to the students about one element of those marking criteria. So getting the students to really understand and develop that understanding. That's one of the videos we've got up online. And then another one where a complete rethink of the assessment approach to make it more of a portfolio assessment rather than end of module exam. So thinking again about that authenticity, and in particular the opportunity for students to act on feedback and change their learning behaviours. And then computer sciences used it just as a general guideline for how people should approach assessment. And the final 2 at the bottom are from the University of Zaragoza. One was using it as a means to engage students better and encourage the students to be able to feedback on the assessments that they were presented with. And then the financial management course to encourage the use of critical reflection and especially self-evaluation to develop students being able to give feedback to themselves and also then feedback into the design and redesign of the assessment. So hopefully you can see there's a range of different things, some big, some small, some of which involved massive changes to an assessment, some of which are just very, very small tweaks in a range of different disciplines. So the sorts of things that they have in common, we're running out of time, so I will just nip through this. They're all underpinned by a quality theory. So one of the benefits of using the EAT framework is it's a research-informed framework. So actually, if you're doing something aligned to that, you're doing it because it's supported by the evidence in the literature. The effective ones are ones that were focused. You knew what you were trying to do and why, and you weren't trying to change everything all at once. The ones that were rooted in context and adapted to that specific discipline also seem to be the ones that seem to have the best effects. ones that involved students and were based on changing ideas and changing principles were really, really effective. And having something that was measurable and a good idea of what you were measuring is a good indicator of a good intervention and something that has good impact and something that's embedded, and so it's sustainable through that that module. Having baselines of where you started is important, because then you can compare to what you had afterwards, and having some sort of methodology to measure that change and measure that impact as well. And also transparency in what happened. If it didn't go well, great, okay, no problem. You can work out different ways of changing it in the future, and some means of showing that impact and measuring those data and analysing those data. Was the effect big? Was it small? Did it cover a large number of students? Was it a very minor change that actually wasn't worth the effort? So not all interventions end up being good interventions. So the important thing is to identify ones that work and ones that don't, or ones that are worth continuing and ones that are worth changing. So that's just a little summary of the different sorts of interventions you can have in terms of either the level of engagement or the types of engagement you have with students, things that change people's assessment literacy and their understanding of the role of assessment in learning, things that make things better to do with constructive alignment, things that align better between the assessment and the learning outcomes, and that change and modify and manage the expectations of both students and staff as part of that assessment. Ones that are inclusive, that enable students to compete effectively within that assessment, and ones that help the students become independent learners and self-critical and self-evaluatory learners as well. So the key issues about any sort of intervention and the evaluation of it is understanding what the background is and what evidence is out there and how to use it effectively. We can always help with that. And so some of the resources we're putting up on the website are designed to do just that, to help people really understand some of the key terminology and the jargon behind these things. Having a clear focus and confidence just to try something different is a really, really important factor. And to have the support there from people who are more senior to you, potentially, that it is okay to do that, and it's okay to try and change things. And if they don't work out, then there's support for you to manage that. And look at the process and the outcomes and translating that theory into practice, thinking about the quality of the things you're doing and taking time to stop and think what the potential consequences are of what you're doing, really, really important. And often making small changes can be just as impactful as trying to make big ones, sometimes even more so. This is just a little thing that comes from a paper that Carol developed in terms of if you were thinking of doing this as a case study, and we would love if you did, the sorts of things that we'd like you to think about. So what is the assessment you're trying to do? What's the change you're making? What would that case study focus on? How would you then measure that impact? And what are the outcomes for yourself, for the learners, for the community as a whole, for the other staff? And so it's not just about doing something and measuring the impact. There's also impacts of causal impacts on you, your practice, your perceptions. And so that's really interesting to capture as well. Okay, we'll stop talking there. And we've got a quarter of an hour or so, 10 minutes to open the floor up to questions. So that QR code there, we'll pop that link in the chat when we close the image down. That's just if you would like to be updated or keep in touch, or if you'd be interested in doing an intervention and you'd like us to contact you and give you some support in terms of how you might take that about, pop your name on that and we'll try and get in touch with you fairly soon. We've got a bit of a backlog with that, but I'll try and get back to you as soon as we possibly can. So thank you very much for your attention. I noticed there's been all sorts of discussions happening in the chat. So I'll stop sharing now. I think Sheila's put that link in the chat. And then if anyone's got any questions, please pop your hand up and we can chat. Thank you very much. I haven't got any hands up yet, but I think one interesting thing that was mentioned in the chat from Rebecca was talking about the trade-off between validity and authenticity and, the appropriateness of assessment and the logistics of an assessment as well. And often assessments get designed because they're logistically easy to do rather than because they have an impact on the student learning. And the biggest casualty for this, unfortunately, is group work. So a lot of people do group work because if you have groups of 5 students, that cuts your marking down by a factor of 5. Whereas actually, what you should be using group work assignments for, and they're really powerful things to use, is to develop interpersonal skills, group working skills, collaborative skills. And so actually group work, if it's done properly, is much more labor intensive, or should be more labor intensive than people often think. Often people go, oh, well, you can do that in a group and just give me your result at the end, without thinking how you support students in working collaboratively as a group. Aoife's just said, have you got resources or insights for measuring the effect of assessment interventions, i.e. the correct methods to measure? We will. We'll have some of those put up on the website, and already we've got some things on Carol's website that can talk about the types of things you want to look at when measuring an impact. But the key thing is to think of it more holistically. A lot of people go, well, the only measure of impact is the change in student marks, but actually that can be affected by a range of different things. So as Nigel put in the chat, it could be affected just by cohort variation. You could have a better cohort this year than you did last year. It could be a number of other things that happened. It could be that the students had more time to do the assessment because an assessment on a different course or a different module got moved. So it's thinking more about the changes in behavior, changes in engagement, changes in the sorts of things the students are doing, as well as do they get a better mark for it? I think that's a key thing. Don't know, Sheila, if you spotted any other questions, or if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask someone.
I lost most of the chat when I
all right, you died.
William K has his hand up. Did you want to?
Yep. Will?
Yeah, just a brief one. It's I typed out a reply to Rebecca. It was the discussion in the chat about making assessments more or less ChatGPT-able, and how we go about changing assessments to either push back against AI tools or try to accommodate them in a way to make it, students can use them fairly and appropriately. And Rebecca kindly replied and said it's logical that tasks become harder when we start to use ChatGPT tools, because those tools allow the student to do some of the more easy tasks. And it's just sort of become a challenge for me in particular when redesigning some year one undergraduate assessments, is that I'm finding it now, I'm having to create questions that are pitched maybe slightly too high, or are assessing skills that students haven't yet developed at that stage in their degree. And so it's just, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment that it's making my life quite difficult, actually trying to redesign assessments without making them more difficult than I want them to be, in light of these new AI tools. So.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole range of challenges that AI is bringing up, and it's interesting to see where assessment will be in a year's time. Are we going to move more towards a process version of assessment where it's more looking at what they do rather than what they produce, or change the sorts of questions that we ask that aren't things that AI can answer? So really important point. Thank you. That's great. Aoife, you've got
Hi Steve, thanks for that. And I just follow up on your response to the question that I had there in the chat. I suppose I'm thinking more because I know obviously the qualitative research can be useful in focus groups and getting more depth around students' perceptions and experiences, but is there, in terms of quantitative research, I know there's the assessment experience questionnaire, but I'm wondering, can the EAT framework be used to evaluate a change in, I suppose, student and lecturer knowledge or perceptions of those 12 criteria that are on the framework? Is that an accepted way to use the EAT framework?
Yeah, you can do. I'll pass over to Sheila because she's actually done that.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so one thing we did when I was working with Steve in Cardiff is we took the EAT wheel and we got the lecturer who was running an assessment or a unit to rank the assessment on all of the different domains. So they might give it a 3 for what does good look like and 5 for something else. And we got the students to do exactly the same independently. And you could see these really kind of big gaps in, the lecturer thought it was a 5 and the students thought it was a 3. And then we use that to really empower the students to have conversations with the lecturers. So we then kind of ran some focus groups with students and lecturers together to try and, tease out what it was. And often it was something very small that the students, maybe the lecturer had assumed that students know X, Y, and Z, and they really didn't. So sometimes it was literally just a little bit more information, and then it was aligned, and then you can map it again the next year, and ideally those perceptions get closer together so that the expectations of staff and students ideally all become a 5 all the way around. So that's one way it could potentially be used in a more quantitative way. Yeah.
Okay. And you can do a sort of before and after thing potentially. So you get or year on year looking at the perceptions to see are you sort of gradually creeping up and narrowing those gaps.
And is there any publications that you know of that have used the EAT framework in that way that you could look at for reference, or probably not yet?
I don't think there are. But I'll try and follow that up with Carol, because I know she has published a number of case studies from a previous project. So probably one of those you used it, but I'll follow that up and add that to the follow-on email that I send out, or drop your line. But yeah, so, and that's one of the things we want to try and do with the case studies, is try and produce some things that people can use as actual metrics, or as sort of like a model for how to do something like that.
Yeah.
But if that's something you'd be interested in doing, we're happy to work with you and develop something that could be publishable, or could be something that you can then use more consistently in the future.
Yeah, that's what we are planning to do. So I filled out the Microsoft Forms team, and we can touch base on it after.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
There was an interesting question in the chat. I'll just do it quickly because I know we're nearly out of time. So Nicola put, what are our considerations for program level assessments regarding logistics, specifically around student workload, because course coordinators are often not flexible and students often take different optional courses. That is a real challenge. One thing we're doing at Bristol University at the moment is trying to get program teams together for workshops. It's not an easy thing to do, but if you can get the whole program teams together and really kind of get them to buy into the student journey through their assessments, I think that can be quite powerful. So we have some exercises where we just kind of give program teams big massive sheets of paper and loads of post-it notes, and we get them to map out their units, stick on what assessments they have, what types of assessments, where they occur on optional units and whatever. And actually that visual map is really quite powerful to say, the holistic journey of your students, they are doing all of these assessments. Do they really need all of them? Which ones feed into one another? You can look at integration. So it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but if you can get the program teams together and actually map this out, and one way to sell it is actually sometimes reducing the assessment load, increase it, it's better for staff because it reduces their marking workloads, and actually it can be better for students to give them more space to consolidate. And so it's work in progress, but it is doable, but it probably needs to be a team approach to that. And if you can get students involved in those conversations, even better. Having a student say, this, my route was really good, but mine wasn't because blah, 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 then it that can be really powerful as well. So.
And I think a key thing with that is working backwards rather than forwards. So start with, what does a graduate look like? What does someone look like at the end of my course? Then say, what are the skills they need to do that? Then you can build assessments backwards. So you then got assessments that sort of drive those skills and measure those skills in the final year. Then you say, right, what do I need to do in year 2 that develops the skills for year 3? What do I need to do in year 1 that lays the basis for those skills? So having a core of a spiral curriculum through of, you know, skills at this level, and this level are really important. But, you know, for the experience I've found is that needs to start with the conversation of what does a graduate look like? What does the end product of my course look like? And how are we supporting the student to getting there? Whereas, as, you know, as I think the point you made in your comment was often it's a case of everyone does their own thing. They do an assessment they think is good for their module, but then it doesn't actually fit together naturally within a big scheme of things. Just getting people together and talking about it is a really useful thing, and using something like the framework. There are other frameworks out there as well that help start that conversation and gives people frames of reference that they can look at to sort of evaluate the quality of what it is they're doing. Brilliant. Okay, well, we've got to 1 o'clock. So thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate you being here. And all of the comments in the chat, some really interesting discussions in the chat. As ever, this one will go up on our YouTube site as well. And we are also running a couple of face-to-face workshops in the UK. Hopefully one on the Monday the 19th of June, and another one in Cardiff, and another one in Bristol on Thursday the 13th of July. I think those are both provisional dates. We'll send more information out. And then there'll be also some workshops and events being run in Portugal and in Spain as well by the other partners within the project. Those will be sort of training the trainer events to help you support other people in doing EAT-based interventions. Okay, thank you very much. And hope everyone has a good rest of the week. And thank you for coming, and especially to those who've been here. I can see at least one person who's been here to all of the 5 webinars so far. So thank you. And if you need any certification to show that you've been to these webinars, just let me know and I can send that out to you. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.